I've been living in Amsterdam for the last few months. And of course, here in Amsterdam, just about every drug is legal, except cocaine and heroin. And even so, they don't really hassle you much about drugs because the Dutch think that it's better to have it out there in the open, legal or more or less legal, and treat people who are addicted as opposed to persecuting them. And that's a very sensible idea. But the thing that struck me is that psychedelics are legal here, pretty much. If they catch you with LSD or psilocybin, they're not going to arrest you if it's for personal consumption, okay? And like softer psychedelics, such as truffles, are for sale at head shops, you know, at the corner here, wherever you want to go. And that's why because they're so readily available, I decided to take some. And I want to talk about my experiences with them. See, when I was a child, when I was 14 years old, I did a lot of drugs. I hung out with a group of kids who were at the same time very, very smart and very much into drugs, and also into D&D and into certain progressive rock bands and shit like that. I mean, it was, you know, just a weird little clique. And I did a lot of drugs back when I was 14, 15 years old. But then I moved to Chile, and in Chile there wasn't a drug culture per se, it was much more into drinking. And so I just didn't do many drugs after that until I was in my 20s. And by that time I just didn't feel like doing drugs because I thought, you know, been there, done that kind of thing, you know? Now see, at the time I had already done acid. I'd done twice, or three times actually, I'd done half a tab of acid. And, you know, I'd seen pretty pictures, but, you know, this was when I was 13, 14 years old. And so for me, the experience was just the hallucinations. And that's all I got out of it, you know, because I was just too young. And you know, retrospectively, I think it's crazy. But that was the extent of my experience with psychedelics. I'd done half a tab of acid, I think 3 times, when I was 13 and turned into 14. And that was it. But you know, all of a sudden here I am, an old man of 52. And I see that shrooms are readily available. And I figured, you know, why not try it? But before I did that, I started researching psychedelics. And I was very interested in the state of understanding of psychedelics because of something that happened to me when I was 14 years old. You see, when I was 14 years old, there was this boy called Michael. That's the only name I'll give him. And he was a classmate of mine, and he was a functioning alcoholic. I mean, no fooling around. The guy had serious home problems, you know, his parents and whatnot, all kinds of problems that I'm not going to get into. But he sort of like soothed himself with vodka. And I realize now retrospectively that he was an alcoholic, and this is a 14-year-old kid at the time. He was a friend of mine. We played guitar together. You know, we were into guitar, you know, that kind of situation when you're that age. And he would be drunk, I would say, 3 mornings out of 5, because we took the bus together. And he would be, you know, hammered in the morning, and he'd bring a little vial of booze to school. And he'd be drinking during school time, you know? And it was just, at the time I thought it was funny. I thought it was cool because I was a 14-year-old imbecile. That's why I thought it was cool. Retrospectively, I thought it was horrifying. But here came the interesting part. We dropped acid together. We dropped it at least twice together. I forget who I was with the 3rd time, but Mike and I took it twice together. And what happened after the 2nd time he took acid was that he forgot that he wanted a drink. Yeah, that was the weird thing. I mean, it really just blew my mind at the time. He simply forgot that he wanted a drink. It just didn't cross his mind anymore. And from that moment, I realized that psychedelics were not this evil drug, that there might be something there. And the fact of the matter is, I read this really interesting book called How to Change Your Mind by a guy called Michael Pollan. I suggest you read it. It's an extremely interesting book because Poland is one of these immersive journalists. He writes for the New Yorker. He's a big brain, you know, and a very, very good writer. And the book is an exploration of psychedelics from all fronts. And he looks at it historically, when it was discovered in the West, its usages in ancient civilizations, how it was developed in the West, Timothy Leary, that whole scene. And he also talks about the current state of research into psychedelics. And psychedelics, it turns out, has very powerful effects on people who are terminally ill. Yeah, these people who are terminally ill feel a sense of acceptance when they take psychedelics. They realize that their cancer or whatever disease they have is terminal. They will die. But the anxiety and confusion of the situation that they're in, that they're dying and their death is imminent, they become reconciled to it after they take psychedelics. That was the starting point of modern research into psychedelics. And from that point on, more research has led investigators to realize that psychedelics can help with addiction. And this is the thing I had seen with Michael, and the Michael Pollan book confirms this, because there have been studies, control studies, that show how psychedelics rearranges the chemicals in your head so that you're not addicted to booze, not addicted to cigarettes. It sort of like makes you forget, which is really, really interesting, because that was the experience my buddy Mike had back when we were in junior high. Yeah, it was like he forgot that he wanted a drink. And so anyway, I read this stuff, and while I've been here, I've been taking psychedelics. I've taken 3 trips, and the fact of the matter is, this coming weekend, probably Monday, I'll be taking psychedelics again. Just another exploration of it. And to tell you the truth, this video is basically me telling you guys that I think it's a very smart idea for you to try psychedelics. Try psychedelics in the right set of circumstances. Set and setting. Let me explain. See, a lot of people say that to have a good trip, to have a good psychedelic experience, what's most important is that you have a good set and setting, in the sense of your setting, the place where you take your trip, is very calm, very controlled, very soothing. And your set is your mentality, what you are thinking about when you go on your trip. Now, in my own case, what I've done is that the times I've taken a trip, which has been 3 times so far, in all 3 cases, I was alone in my house, in my bedroom, as a matter of fact, and I purposefully put the blinds on and made it as comfortable as possible. And I, disconnected the phone, as it were, just turned everything off. I didn't want any kind of distraction. I just wanted to experience the trip. And all 3 times, the experience has been extraordinarily fulfilling. I didn't learn anything. I mean, I got to be really clear here. It's not that I learned something, but rather I became reconciled to things that were going on in my life. Reconciled in the sense of accepting them. And more to the point, there were a lot of insights that I discovered that I had already had, but it was sort of like I didn't have a firm grip on these revelations or these insights. It was sort of like the pieces were all spread out in my head, but I just needed something to put them together in an orderly shape. It was an extraordinary experience. All 3 of my trips have been extraordinary experiences, because there were certainly moments when I felt great sadness for different things that have happened in my life, that have happened to people I know and people I love. But in all 3 trips, there has been a reconciliation with the truth. And I think this is why it's so valuable, because so often as not, we human beings are past masters at fooling ourselves. We tell ourselves stories that are simply not true. We fool ourselves, and we know we're fooling ourselves. We fool ourselves because sometimes facing the truth hurts so much. It hurts so much that we don't want to. We want to avoid that truth. We want to avoid the truth, and so we tell ourselves stories. We tell ourselves lies so that we aren't hurt. But on these trips, The lies that I told myself, like we all tell ourselves, well, I became reconciled to them. I became reconciled to the truth of who I am. And facing that truth, especially the parts that are least pleasant, the parts that you don't want to face, that you want to avoid. I mean, that's why you're fooling yourself, because you don't want to face the truth, right? You don't want to face the truth about yourself. Well, by way of these psychedelic trips, I was able to reconcile myself to these truths about who I am and face them. And by facing them, overcome them. Realize that they are manageable problems, that the defects I have, the deficiencies of my character, they can be overcome. And I think that that's why it's so valuable. I think that that's why psychedelics are so incredibly valuable. Do keep in mind that I have pretty extensive experience with different kinds of drugs. The only kind of drug that I have never taken is heroin. I've never taken heroin, but I've taken morphine. And of the other drugs, I've taken cocaine, I've taken pot, pills, amphetamines, just about every drug that you can think of. Benzedrine one time. Benzodiazepam. Yeah, when I was 15, man, I was fucking nuts when I was that age. But you know, you're a teenager, you don't know shit from Shinola, right? But all of the drugs that I've taken, and worst of all, alcohol, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the absolute worst drug, they all dull you. They all make you stupid. And it takes a long time to get over the effects. And the older you get, the harder it is to get over the effect. But with psychedelics, it's quite the opposite. Yeah, you take psychedelics, and once your trip is over, you're clear as a bell. You don't have a hangover like you do with alcohol, for instance. You don't have any kind of negative feeling after the fact. On the contrary, there's this sense of great clarity. And like I said before, all the things that you already knew, they're more clear. There's no new insight. It's not like all of a sudden your head is opened up and you see things that you had never thought of before. No, it's everything that is in your head, that's already in your head, just becomes more clear. And it's an extraordinary compound, all these psychedelics. I mean, I'm overwhelmed, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. Because I think, especially with people such as myself, who are highly structured and prone to anxiety, because I am an anxious guy. I tend to worry about stuff. And taking LSD and mushrooms has been a source of it's been a calming influence in my life. And let me explain something specific that's happened to me that I can't get over it, but let me get into it. See, for the last year or so, I've been having these heart palpitations. I mean, real serious shit, right? And these heart palpitations, sometimes my cardiologist would measure me and I would be like my heart would be beating at 130 beats per minute. 130 beats per minute, you heard right. And it would be all over the place. I mean, no rhythm. Totally arrhythmic. This is tachycardia. And it can be conceivably very dangerous because you can have a stroke, okay? You're not gonna have a heart attack because of it, or at least my cardiologist didn't think that I would have a heart attack. But I could get a stroke, which is extremely serious. And like, for instance, a few weeks ago, every single day I had tachycardia for most of the day. And I was on all kinds of medications and just trying to, with my doctor, of course, trying to figure out what was going on. And here's the thing that I find extraordinary, and this is me. I'm telling you what actually happened. You don't have to believe me, but I'm telling you what happened. What happened was that I was having these episodes of tachycardia all the time. And I decided, for various reasons, that I wanted to take a trip on LSD. And the set that I had in mind, the setting is always the same. My bedroom with the blinds closed, very calm, very soothing. And the set that I had in my head, what I wanted to explore, the theme, because I found that this is very useful insofar as psychedelic trips is concerned, is to have a theme. The theme that I wanted was to unclog the pipes. Because for various reasons, I think that I have not been living my best life. At this time in my life, things are going very well in just about every front, but I do not feel that I'm living my best life. There was a feeling that my life was stoppered with shit. Yeah, it's kind of like a grim metaphor, but that's how I felt. I felt like the pipes in my life were all like twisted up. Because there have been different issues in my life that I don't really want to get into because there are personal issues, but I felt that there was confusion, a lack of direction in my life, and I wanted to straighten it out. I wanted to unclog the pipes. And that was the theme that I had for my last trip, that I wanted to unclog the pipes. And I had a LSD trip that lasted about 12 hours, and it was exceedingly, how could I put it? I faced a lot of things that I had been avoiding in my life. A lot of truths that I knew, but just didn't want to face. And during my trip, I faced them. And of course, there were episodes of giggling and just laughing and just amusing myself and whatnot. And there were all kinds of hallucinations that were very fun and all that stuff that was good. But from my point of view, insofar as my psyche was concerned, on a psychological level, I felt that during this trip I reconciled myself to certain things about who I am as a man of 52. And by reconciling myself to them, I was able to find peace. And the thing that happened was that immediately after, in the days after, I didn't have any more tachycardia. And I suspended my medication, thinking to myself, well, maybe it's psychosomatic, maybe it's whatever. I suspended my medication, and over the next few days, I still felt great. No more tachycardia. The fact is, I attributed it to psychedelics. I attribute it to that acid trip because I realized retrospectively that a lot of my anxiety that was, I think, causing my tachycardia was because I was just so confused. I didn't know where to go or what to do. And having this trip just cleared the pipes. Yeah. It was the perfect metaphor. I felt that the pipes were cleaned out. That all the shit that had accumulated in my life, that all the shit that had accumulated in my head was like flushed out. And it cleared out. And when I ended the trip, the next morning, I fell asleep very late at like 4 in the morning, but I woke up at 7, even though I didn't want to because I thought, 3 hours is not enough sleep. I want more sleep. But I woke up the next day and I felt clear. And then the next night, I slept like 9 hours, and that's when I felt really clear. There was a sense of like acceptance and clarity. And all the little debris of my life had been reconciled. That was my personal experience, and since that trip I haven't had any tachycardia, and I haven't taken my meds, the meds I'm supposed to take. The fact is tomorrow morning I'm supposed to go and see my cardiologist, and I'm going to report all this, and I don't think he's going to dig what I have to tell him, right? But it's the truth, And look, you guys know that I'm a fairly level-headed guy, okay? I'm not like a hippy-dippy, trippy kind of guy at all. But you got to call him like you see him. Now, in my experience, I don't want to tell people to do anything illegal or anything of the sort, but in my experience, psychedelics help. I think that they're extremely useful. Taken in a controlled environment with no distractions, nobody around to hassle you or anything like that, and taken in a situation whereby nothing bad will happen. Okay? That there's no way really for you to do anything foolish. And by the way, when you drop acid, you don't, there is a point where you sort of like lose yourself, what they call the death of the ego, but it's not, you never really lose control. You're always fairly aware of what's going on. Okay? You're not going to do anything foolish, no matter what the naysayers and the just say no crowd might say. No, you'll be fine. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it because, like I say, I'm a fairly structured guy. I'm a fairly level-headed guy. I'm a conservative guy. And I think that this is extremely valuable. It's not valuable for the hallucinations and the giggly fits and all that crap. I mean, that's fun, sure, but that's not the reason. When you take cocaine, for instance, you feel like you're the smartest guy in the world, yeah? And your heart is racing a mile a minute, and you're just, going crazy. And at the end of it, you've got nothing to show for it except a hangover. But with psychedelics, you understand yourself better. Okay, that's all I have to say about this topic. If you can, I would highly suggest, highly recommend that you take psychedelics. I'm not saying that you should. I mean, it's illegal in most places. It's illegal, yes, but we all know the guy who knows the guy who can help us out, okay? I highly recommend it. I highly recommend you read that book by Michael Pollan first. It's extremely useful information. And it's an extremely well-written book. It's a fun book, even though it's fairly long. It's like 350, 400 pages, I think. It might be fairly long, but it's very entertaining, and you'll get a lot of really good information from it. Read it first, and then consider it. Because if you feel confusion, if you feel very unhappy with who you are, if you feel very confused as to what you're doing with your life, as I was feeling, I genuinely think it can help. Yeah. So there you go. Take it easy.